"Can you take us to town?" she asked. The rancher nodded. "Only if you promise to come back home." Wyoming Territory, late autumn, 1889. The wind had teeth that night, sharp and biting as it slid through the cracks of the weathered Kincaid ranch house. Troy Kincaid, 38, stirred from sleep, not because of a nightmare or restlessness, but because of a sound, a low thump, then the faint creak of something wooden shifting. He sat up in bed, eyes narrowing. The barn had settled dozens of times before, but this was different, deliberate, too soft to be the wind, too real to ignore. Without a word, he reached for the oil lantern on the nightstand and lit it with practiced hands. His revolver was already strapped to the side of the bed. He holstered it, slipped on his coat, and stepped into his boots. The floor groaned under his weight as he moved through the quiet house and out the back door. Outside, the sky was dark. Clouds hung heavy and low, blotting out the moon. The wind stirred the dry grass, sending brittle whispers across the field. The lantern's glow carved a narrow path through the dark. Troy followed the sound around the side of the granary, his boots crunching over gravel and frost. As he turned the corner, the light caught movement. There, near the back wall of the granary, a woman. She was crouched beside a rough wooden cart, her dark hair soaked and clinging to her face. Her coat was too thin for the season, the hem ragged. Her fingers gripped the edge of one of 3 small wooden crates. Behind her stood 2 children, one girl, maybe 6 years old, and a boy who looked about 10. Both were wrapped in old blankets, their eyes wide, their cheeks flushed with cold. Troy stopped a few paces away, raising the lantern. "Who are you?" he asked, voice low but clear. The woman didn't flinch. She didn't plead. Instead, she looked up at him with calm, tired eyes and said, "Can you take us to town?" The question landed like a stone in still water. Troy looked past her to the crates, each roughly nailed shut, weathered, then to the children, who stood close but didn't cry. Their silence said more than fear. It said they were used to it. He met her eyes again. "Town's 5 miles in the dark," he said. "You planning on walking?" "We were," she said softly. He studied her a long moment. She stood her ground, neither begging nor threatening. A woman on the run, maybe, but not a thief, not the way her hand gently rested on the boy's shoulder. Not the way she glanced down at the girl as the wind lifted the child's blanket. Troy stepped closer, lowering the lantern. "What's in the crates?" he asked. "Everything worth saving," she said. "That's all I'll say for now." He looked her over again. And the children, and the cart's uneven wheels. Then, after a moment's silence, he gave a small nod. "Only if you promise to come back home." The woman blinked, as if surprised by the word home. But she didn't argue. She nodded once. "My name is Maria," she said. Troy tilted his head. "Troy Kincaid." She moved aside so he could grasp the cart's handle. Without another word, he lifted it and turned back toward the house. The children followed. Maria brought up the rear. Inside, he lit the fireplace and set out a kettle. He didn't ask questions. She didn't offer answers. The children curled up near the hearth without a sound. Maria sat at the edge of the chair, hands folded tight. Her eyes scanned the walls, the shelves, the rifle by the door. "I'll take you at first light," Troy said finally. She looked over at him. "Thank you." He leaned against the mantel, arms crossed. "You got secrets, Miss Maria, but if you're running from hell, I reckon 5 miles in the dark is better than staying still." Maria gave the faintest nod, her voice just above a whisper. "Then thank you for not asking why." Troy watched her a moment longer, then turned toward the window. Outside, the wind howled again, but inside, there was stillness. For the first time in a long time, his home had strangers in it, but it didn't feel wrong. It felt like something had just begun. The wagon wheels creaked beneath the weight of silence as they rolled over the frost-hardened dirt road. The moon, pale and thin, drifted behind clouds like a watchful eye. Troy Kincaid sat tall at the reins. one gloved hand steady on the leather straps, the other holding the lantern that lit the narrow path ahead. Maria Monroe sat beside him, wrapped in an old wool blanket he had pulled from the barn before they left. Her shoulders were stiff, eyes fixed forward, saying nothing. The two children, Ben and Sadie, he had learned their names only minutes earlier, were nestled in the back, huddled together under layers of worn cloth. They had fallen asleep quickly, their breathing soft and even. The cold nipped at his face, but Troy didn't mind the sting. What weighed heavier was the quiet, the kind of quiet that made a man wonder what sort of storm was hidden behind it. He broke it. "Your husband," he said, his voice low. "Where is he?" Maria's eyes stayed on the road. "Dead." Troy gave a slow nod. "That's so." "Worse if he was alive," she added after a pause. He didn't ask what that meant. Something in her tone made it clear. There were doors in her memory better left unopened. They continued on, the lantern casting long, moving shadows through the trees. The woods thickened at parts, branches clawing above like fingers of the past, reaching out. But Troy kept the horses steady, his expression unreadable. As the first signs of town lights flickered far ahead, dim glows in the belly of the valley, he slowed the horses near a bend in the road. A small stream trickled nearby, half frozen but still moving. "We'll stop here for a moment," he said, pulling the reins gently. Maria nodded without speaking. He hopped down first, checked the horses, then stepped aside to stretch his back. Maria stayed seated for a long minute, as if debating whether to follow. Finally she stood and stepped off the wagon. The stream gurgled softly beside them. Maria knelt and splashed water on her face, letting out a slow breath. The lantern flickered nearby on the wagon's edge, casting a glow over her features. Her skin looked thinner in the light, not from age, but from wear. She walked around to the back of the wagon. Troy didn't move, but his eyes followed her. Maria lifted the lid on one of the crates. The hinges creaked, barely audible above the whisper of the wind. Inside were papers, bundled documents, a worn, leather-bound ledger, a faded passport. Tucked beneath them was a cloth pouch, partly open, revealing what looked like gold coins. And a folder, the edge marked with names in careful handwriting. She pulled it up, just enough to glance at the first page. Her fingers lingered there. Then she froze, realizing Troy was watching. Without a word, she shut the crate and secured the latch. He said nothing, just waited until she turned around. "I do not steal," she said, softly but firmly. They belong to me, or to those who never got the chance to keep them." Troy didn't answer immediately. He stepped closer, gaze steady. "I didn't say anything," he replied. "You thought it." "I think a lot of things," he said. "But none of them matter more than those kids sleeping back there. You're hauling something heavier than wood, Maria. I can see it in your hands." She looked down, then back toward the wagon. "I only need a few days," she said, "to finish what I started. After that, I'll disappear if I have to." Troy shook his head slightly. "We'll see what happens after we get you to town," said. He helped her back onto the seat. She looked at him then, for a brief second longer than before, something guarded, but not cold. The wagon rolled forward again, wheels turning over gravel and memory. Behind them, the trees whispered things that only the night could hear. And ahead, the town waited, with lights that flickered like promises, and truths still hiding in the dark. The town of Dry Creek was barely waking when Troy Kincaid guided the wagon down its main street. Windows glowed with faint lantern light, the forge still dark, and cats darted through quiet alleys. Troy pulled the reins, stopping in front of the small white chapel at the edge of town. The steeple loomed in the mist, smoke rising gently from the chimney. "We'll start here," he said, stepping down. Maria followed, careful not to wake the sleeping children. Her eyes scanned the quiet buildings, wary and uncertain. "Wait here," Troy told her, then knocked on the chapel door. It opened at once. Reverend Albie Whitlock appeared, thin, gray-haired, and sharp-eyed. His stern face eased at the sight of Troy. "Well, I'll be. You bringing saints or sinners today?" "Neither," Troy said. Just someone who needs safekeeping. The Reverend stepped aside. Come in then. Maria hesitated, then lifted one of the wooden crates and followed. Whitlock watched her, then offered help. I carry my own weight, she said. They placed the crate near a pew. Maria opened it. Inside, stamped papers, bank slips, letters. Whitlock's brows lowered. You need this hidden? Maria nodded. From the wrong kind of law. Whitlock touched the lid. Consider it done. They left soon after. Troy brought them to the boarding house and paid for a back room, quiet, away from gossiping eyes. The children still slept. Maria turned to him. I have to see someone. Who? The sheriff. Troy frowned. That smart? No, she said, but it's time. He didn't argue. I'll wait outside. The sheriff's office was 2 streets over. Maria walked alone, head high. Troy waited across the road, watching. She stepped inside without looking back. Hours passed. Noon came and went. Still, she didn't return. Troy had just stepped off the curb when she reappeared. Maria's scarf was tight around her neck, her steps slow. Troy reached her fast. What happened? She didn't answer at first. Then she lifted her sleeve slightly. A bruise, deep and dark, bloomed on her forearm. He froze. Maria! There are men who don't want me to speak, she said. Some wear uniforms. His jaw tightened. You want me to go in there? She shook her head. They want fear. I won't give it. She looked like someone who'd survived worse. I told him part of the truth, she added. Enough to shake him. Did he believe it? He already knew. He just needed to remind me what silence costs. They walked back in silence. Leaves scraped across the boards underfoot. At the boarding house, the children were up. Sadie ran into Maria's arms. Ben lingered by the wall, watching Troy. Maria kissed Sadie's head and met Troy's gaze. We're going to need more than luck. You've got more than that, he said. You've got me. She didn't smile, but something in her shoulders eased. In that small room, as shadows stretched longer on the floor, the air shifted. The bruise on Maria's arm was just the beginning. The crates held proof, but what she carried inside was heavier. And the real fight hadn't even begun. The ride back to the ranch was quieter than before. Maria sat beside Troy in the wagon, her face unreadable. The children slept under the blanket, their small bodies curled into each other. The lights of town faded behind them, but what had happened there remained like a bruise neither could ignore. Sheriff Warnock's parting words echoed in Troy's ears. I won't forget your face, he had said to Maria, low and bitter. Only Reverend Whitlock had stood firm. She's a witness, he had declared. If anything happens to her before she speaks, that blood's on your hands. Back at the ranch, Maria moved like a shadow. She rarely spoke, and when she did, it was only to the children. Sadie clung to her skirts. Ben never left her side. Troy saw it all but asked nothing. Not yet. That night, wind whispered through the cottonwoods. Troy stepped out to check the horses. Rounding the porch, he found her sitting on the steps, lantern beside her, its glow tracing the wear on her face. She didn't startle. She didn't look away. He sat next to her. They said nothing for a long time. Finally, she said, You asked why I had to leave. I'll tell you, but not because I need your pity. Troy kept still. I was born in Louisiana, married young. Henry Monroe was everything a town wanted: money, manners, a smile for the preacher. He gave to charities, opened schools, took in strays for show. But behind closed doors, he was building something darker. She drew in a breath, held it, then exhaled slowly. I handled the books, numbers, that's what I was good at. He let me see just enough, until I opened the wrong ledger. She turned to him. Fake names, wire transfers, money routed through churches and private banks to men running rehabilitation centers. Only they weren't centers, they were camps, for women. Girls, mostly. Poor, unwanted, hidden. Troy's face hardened. One of the smuggling routes ran just north of here. I found the map. Red dots marked drop points, holding cabins. Places women went missing. She faltered. I packed what I could, files, ledgers, photos. I took Ben, my son, and Sadie. Her voice broke. Sadie's mother was one of the women. She begged me with her last breath. I couldn't leave the girl behind. From her coat, Maria pulled a folded paper and handed it to him. 12 names, ages, notes, written in haste. 5 of them are dead, she whispered. 2 vanished just this year. 1, Etta Langley, worked the peach fields here. You knew her. Troy scanned the list. He remembered Etta, bright-eyed, gone without a goodbye. He folded the paper. Why haven't they arrested you? Because I haven't disappeared, Maria answered. Yet, if I vanish before I testify, before the court sees proof, then all of it dies with me. They don't need to kill me. They only need me quiet. A sound cut through the night. Hooves, quick, fading. Troy stood fast, hand on the revolver at his hip. That wasn't one of ours. He stepped off the porch, eyes sharp on the tree line. If they come back, he muttered, I won't ask questions first. Maria remained on the steps, arms wrapped around herself. Then she stood and vanished inside. When she returned, she carried one of the wooden boxes. She placed it gently on the porch between them and opened it. Inside, black and white photographs. Women with tired smiles. A hand-drawn map with red inked circles. Letters, dozens, tied with twine, all unopened. Troy looked at the contents, then at her. We'll keep these safe, he said, and we'll keep you safe, you and those kids. Maria didn't speak at first. Then quietly, I've never trusted a man with a gun, but for the first time, I'm not afraid of yours. Troy didn't take his eyes off the woods, but his voice came steady. Good, because I've got enough bullets to make sure the next man who tries anything won't get a second chance. A week passed, under the brittle sun of late autumn. Troy had been riding out alone at first light, taking a long detour through the northern woods, where he knew the telegraph stage passed. Disguised in an old coat and worn hat, he'd sent copies of the documents Maria brought to a friend of his in Denver, an ex-investigator who owed him more than a few favors. He used no names, no return address, only a mark they had once used during wartime, a horse branded with a single flame. Back at the ranch, life shifted into something resembling normal. Maria mended clothes and swept the porch. Ben practiced tying ropes. Sadie learned how to guide a pony around the corral with a soft voice and steady hands. Their laughter came in short, cautious bursts, but it came. One morning, as Troy was cutting firewood, a rider appeared at the edge of the trail. Tall, clean boots, black gloves. Lucius Gray. He rode in like he belonged there, slow and smiling. Troy straightened, axe in hand. Lucius dismounted casually, brushing dust from his coat. His eyes found Maria, who had stepped out onto the porch with Ben behind her. Well, well, he drawled. Sister-in-law, been a long road for you. Maria's face tightened. What do you want, Lucius? He walked closer, boots crunching on gravel. Just came to pick up some things your dearly departed forgot to pass along. You ran out in a hurry, thought you might have misplaced something valuable. Troy stepped in front of him. She has nothing for you. Lucius cocked his head. A ranch hand now, Mr. Kincaid. You always did like playing the hero. I don't play. For a beat, neither moved. Then Lucius smiled wider. You know, all it takes is one phone line, one call to the sheriff, and this whole setup turns ugly. You're not in the city. Out here, folks go missing all the time. Nobody asks too many questions. He turned and mounted his horse again, still calm, still smiling. But I'm generous, he called over his shoulder. I'll give her 2 days to come to her senses. After that, it won't be a conversation. He rode off into the trees. That night, Troy placed his rifle beside the bed. He checked the windows, the doors, the locks on the barn. He did not sleep. Maria didn't either. She sat at the kitchen table long after the fire had died down, a single candle burning low. Her hand trembled slightly as she wrote letters. One for Ben, one for Sadie. Folded and tucked into the back of a drawer, just in case. By morning, they had made a decision. They would leave, not to run, but to fight. Maria would take the documents to the federal circuit judge in Carver's Bluff, a larger town 2 days east, where Gray's influence would not reach so easily. They packed sparingly. Troy prepared the horses. The children didn't ask many questions. Maybe they didn't need to. As Maria tightened the last strap on the saddlebags, Troy stood beside her, quiet. Finally, he said, "If you go, I'm not sure what reason I'll have to open that gate every morning." Maria looked up, eyes soft but steady. "I'm not going to run, Troy. I'm going to finish this. I'll come back, if you still want me to." He didn't answer. But he reached for her hand, wrapped his calloused fingers around hers, and held on just long enough for the promise to settle between them. The town of Carver's Bluff buzzed with the dry, smoky tension of late autumn. Dust swirled along the brick sidewalks, and the courthouse loomed tall at the end of Main Street, its old stone steps worn smooth by decades of feet, both guilty and desperate. Maria and Troy arrived just after dawn. The children left with a trusted friend outside town. Maria wore a borrowed shawl, her hair tied back, face pale but calm. Troy walked beside her like a wall, silent, steady, eyes scanning every corner. Inside, they presented the documents to a federal clerk, who, after a few murmured instructions, led them to a side chamber. There, Judge Silas Reed waited, an older man with tired eyes and a straight back. Maria laid the box of papers before him. "I have names, ledgers, records of illegal labor contracts. These women, many are missing, some dead." Reed lifted the top sheet, eyebrows rising. "Where did you obtain these?" "They belonged to my late husband. I kept them when I ran." Before he could ask more, the door opened. Lucius Gray stepped in, smooth as polished iron. A clean coat, pressed collar, hair combed neatly. Behind him, a deputy sheriff, a man with a badge too shiny and eyes too dull, stood with arms crossed. "Your Honor," Gray began with a slight bow, "I hate to interrupt, but I believe there's been a grave misunderstanding. This woman," he gestured to Maria, "is mentally unstable. She fled her home, taking private documents and fabricating these wild accusations. She's been unwell for years. I won." Maria's jaw clenched. Troy moved half a step forward before Maria put a hand on his arm. "I'm not unstable," she said calmly. "I'm a witness." Reed studied them both, the papers in hand. "Do you have any formal identification, Mrs. Monroe?" Maria's voice faltered. "No. I lost everything when I escaped." Gray smiled faintly. "Convenient." The deputy nodded. "She's wanted for theft of property by the estate of her deceased husband. That's been filed in 3 counties." For a moment, silence settled like ash. Judge Reed flipped slowly through the documents, frowning deeper with each page. Then he set them down and said, "This is not a trial, Mr. Gray, and I make no decisions today. These are serious claims, and they deserve scrutiny." He turned to the clerk. "Have the contents logged. Schedule a hearing in 2 days." Gray stiffened. "Your Honor." "My court," Reed interrupted. "You'll have your say. In 2 days." Outside, the air felt thinner. Troy didn't speak until they were 3 blocks away, boots tapping against cobbled stone. "He went ahead of us, set the whole thing up." Maria nodded, shaken but composed. "He wants the documents buried, and me with them." They didn't wait for a second chance. By sundown, they had left the town behind, riding hard toward the edge of the freight yards. There, tucked between abandoned crates and broken barrels, was an old warehouse belonging to Elijah Croft, a former war medic turned grain merchant, and one of Troy's few remaining friends. Elijah met them with a lantern and 3 wool blankets. "No one'll look here," he said gruffly. "At least not right away." They settled in as best they could, Troy pacing, Maria trying to calm her breath. The children huddled together on a pile of hay, already asleep when Maria checked on them. Outside, the wind picked up. On the loading dock, Maria stepped beside Troy. He leaned against a support beam, arms crossed. He said nothing for a while. Then, "I brought you here, but I need to hear it again." Maria turned to him, the shadows soft across her cheekbones. "You need me to promise I'll come back?" Troy's voice was low. "No, I just want to know you want to." She took his hand, fingers cold from the night. "I do, but I don't need to promise anymore." He looked at her. She smiled, worn, tired, but fierce. "My heart's been back home a long time now." Night fell heavy over the warehouse, like a lid pressed tight. The air had grown colder, the smell of dust and old grain thick in the rafters. Maria had been gone less than an hour when Troy slipped out, promising he would be back quickly with bread, canned goods, and a bottle of clean water. She had wanted to go instead, but he insisted. He never returned on time. When the hours stretched into 2, dread gripped her chest. She wrapped a shawl around her shoulders, grabbed the small pistol hidden in the hay, and stepped into the dark. She found him at the edge of the rail yard, just past the old grain tower. Troy was slumped against a broken wheelbarrow, his left shoulder soaked in blood. Teeth clenched tight as he tried to stay conscious. One of the crates nearby had been knocked over, signs of a struggle. Maria dropped to her knees beside him. "Troy," she whispered, her voice cracking. He opened one eye slowly. "You're early. You're bleeding." "I noticed." Maria glanced around. No one. No more shadows. No more Lucius Gray, though the name sang in her skull like a bell. She helped him up, bracing his weight against her shoulder. It took nearly all her strength to get him back through the warehouse door and onto the makeshift bed of hay and cloth. Once there, she tore away the shredded shirt, revealing the ragged bullet wound along the shoulder, deep but clean. Her hands shook as she poured whiskey onto the torn flesh. Troy didn't make a sound, but his jaw clenched hard enough to crack bone. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, pressing cloth against the wound, trying to stop the bleeding. "This wouldn't have happened if you hadn't tried to protect us. I brought danger to you and the children." Troy exhaled, slow and strained. "No, you didn't bring anything." He caught her hand, sticky with his blood. "You're not a storm, Maria. You're the thing that made all this mess finally make sense." Tears welled in her eyes. "You're going to say something charming while bleeding to death?" His lips twitched into a half smile. "I've got a knack for timing." She tried to laugh. It came out as a soft sob. His gaze found hers in the low light. "You didn't bring danger, Maria. You brought purpose. Brought something worth bleeding for." She knelt beside him, wiping his brow with shaking fingers. Her voice was barely a breath. "All this time I've just been running. From places. From people. From myself." Troy blinked slowly. Then stop. She leaned in closer, forehead resting against his. "I'm tired of running." Her lips found his, not rushed, not desperate. It was quiet, solid, like the earth itself saying yes. He didn't kiss her back with hunger, only with understanding. As if this had been waiting, not for the right moment, but for the right meaning. When she pulled back, her hand rested on his chest, above his slowing heart. "No matter how long it takes," she whispered, "I'll bring all of it into the light. The names, the papers, the lies. I'll drag it into the sun if I have to." Troy's fingers brushed hers. "And when it's over?" She looked down at him, bloodied, broken, yet still watching her like she was the last truth left in the world. "If there's still a place I can call home," she said, voice low and clear, "it's wherever you're still standing." Outside, the wind picked up, scattering hay across the wooden floor. Somewhere in the distance, a train whistle moaned into the night. But in that dim corner of dust and blood, something had rooted, something that would not be moved. The spring wind swept softly through the Kincaid ranch, bending the young wildflowers Maria had planted beside the porch. The air smelled of damp earth and fresh grass, of something beginning. It had been 3 months since the trial. Lucius Gray had been arrested on charges of conspiracy, obstruction, and manslaughter. The evidence Troy had helped smuggle to Denver, names, letters, ledgers, matched statements from missing persons' families and survivors who had once worked in the shadows. Maria's testimony had shaken the courtroom quiet. Her voice, once hoarse from silence, had become clear when it mattered most. The court ruled in her favor. Her name was cleared. She did not return to the city. She did not need to. Maria stayed. She moved into the room upstairs, though no one called it Maria's room. It was simply part of the house now, as she was. The children, Sadie and Ben, slept in the smaller bedroom, their laughter echoing in the barnyard more often than not. Troy filed papers quietly at the county office. A month later, the judge signed off. He was now their legal guardian. Maria spent her mornings tending a small garden by the fence. At night, she wrote. The old journal, once filled with fear and flight, now carried stories of the women who had never made it out, names she wanted the world to remember. And on one quiet afternoon, as the sun lowered behind the barn, painting gold across the sky, Maria stepped onto the porch where Troy was oiling the saddle. She stood still for a long moment, then said softly, "Can you take us to town?" Troy glanced up, eyes shaded by the brim of his hat. A slow smile pulled at the corner of his mouth. "Only if you promise to come back home." Before she could reply, Sadie bolted out the door, grabbing Maria's hand with her small one. "Can we ride next to you this time?" she asked. Ben emerged after her, already tugging on his boots. "I call front seat," he hollered. Troy stood, brushing dust from his pants. "You're both sitting in the back," he said. "Town's too bumpy for games." "But it's smooth when she rides with you," Sadie insisted, pointing at Maria. He paused, his gaze settling on the woman beside him. "Guess we'll make it smoother then," he said, leading them to the wagon. The ride into town was quiet, peaceful. As the horses clopped through the waving grass, Maria sat beside Troy, the wind teasing loose strands of her hair. She looked back once. The ranch slowly disappeared into the horizon, the tall grass swallowing it in waves of gold. But it did not feel like leaving. She touched the brim of her hat, his hat, once, the one he had placed on her head during their first ride to town. "I used to think home was a place you could lose," she whispered. Troy glanced sideways. "And now?" She smiled softly, eyes never leaving the fading barn. "Now I know. Home is where someone's still waiting for you to return. The sun dipped lower. The town waited ahead. But their story, the real story, was behind them, rooted deep in earth and blood and promise. And it would always be there when they came back home. If this story touched your heart, the way Troy's quiet courage and Maria's unbreakable spirit found their way through storm and silence, don't forget to hit that hype button.